Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another movie discussion. This being where I talk about movies that I watch, just full-blown spoiler discussions. That basically, if you're curious, I'll include time codes, just kind of, bouncing around different topics I might have covered, just in case maybe there's certain topics you're curious about hearing my thoughts of, in correlation or rather relation to the movie. But first and foremost, before we really get into any spoilers, because I will let you know exactly when the spoilers start, but just non-spoiler, general thoughts, what I thought about the movie. I thought the movie was great. It has been a very long time since I've seen a solo Batman movie. Now, I don't just mean that in the sense of, just in the sense of the Christopher the Nolan movies. I haven't even watched them in I don't know how many years. I've seen each of them once all the way through. I still don't, I don't think I've ever seen Batman Begins all the way through. I've seen fragments of it. I've definitely seen Dark Knight Rises, but even then it's and I've seen them come on since, but I have not seen watched the entirety of a solo Batman movie since Dark Knight Rises. It's whenever it was I eventually saw that. So it feels kind of, because my experience with a solo Batman story, I think the most recent one I probably experienced was the Telltale Batman game. It's probably my most recent one. Well, I guess along those same lines would be technically Gotham. So, but just as full blown, obviously that was a TV show, but movie-wise, it's been a long time, and so I really enjoy just the feel of this movie, just how dark it was. The fact is that it had this murder mystery element being kind of its ultimate through line, and because so many people, before the movie even came out, were theorizing, could this movie be kind of the Long Halloween? The fact is that it starts on Halloween makes me wonder, is there, obviously it's them doing their own version of it. I wonder would that continue out throughout any other potential future Batmans in this Batman movie set in this continuity. But I thought it was just a really good suspenseful movie. I think it did a really good job kind of hitting you with not necessarily, I don't know if twists and turns will be the right word, but there were certain developments. I like what it really did with the Batman lore. There are some changes, and I'm oh, that's interesting. I'll save that when I actually get into spoilers, but I think they did a lot of really interesting things with the Batman lore, and like I said, this murder mystery element to it. I think the Riddler is the perfect enemy for that, and I like how he was utilized, and how a lot of his stuff is it's a little spoilerish, but not really. It's the fact is he's not in the forefront most of the time. What I mean is most of the stuff is I've already, well, no, because he's done stuff up front, but usually his confrontations with Batman are not face to face most of the movie, and I think that's such a fascinating thing. I guess in my head it's just because of who the Riddler is so boastful and always just kind of up in your face with his riddles and stuff. So I guess it kind of plays into the character, but I guess in my head, there's no true nature of what a character is when it comes to comics. The characters have been rewritten and changed so many different times just for the comics themselves, or even in video games and TV shows and so on and so forth. So, and just movies in general as well. But the cat and mouse element to it, I think, lends itself very nicely to a Riddler and a Batman. Because obviously, our only experience with Riddler, live action wise, is Jim Carrey's, and this is a very, very different one. This is someone who is a little unstable, not just a little unstable, quite unstable, but circumstances led to them that. Not saying you sympathize with them, but you get to understand how Gotham ended up forging someone like the Riddler. So I think that's such a fascinating thing. Like I said, just a lot of the dynamics, and just also the fact is we're not starting from the very, very beginning. We're starting at 2 years into him being Bruce being Batman. So obviously, like it's just in general, I thought the movie was great. I thought it was just had a really nice tone and feel to it. Once again, it's there could be comparisons to the Nolan movies, but I don't remember them so well. So it is that recency blindness, I guess would be the word. Probably not, but it's just I can't remember those movies as vividly, feel and vibe wise. Especially because I'm sure maybe I'm sure the apt description would be okay, Batman Begins versus this. That would probably be the more apt description. I mean, this also has to stack up against an entire trilogy, so it's not so that's why I think most people would probably just keep it Batman Begins versus this, because obviously the two most recent examples, obviously you have Ben Affleck's Batman in the DCEU, doing its own being kind of further in that Batman's continuity, but still. Because we never really got to even see Ben Affleck's Batman in this regard. It's to small extents, but still. Obviously, like I said, I'm just kind of rambling on at this point. But just because of that, I do want to just go ahead and jump straight into spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie, do not go listen any further. Watch the movie, and then if you decide you want to hear some of my thoughts, you want to hear some of the BS coming out of my mouth, you can always come back. So, like I said, spoilers going forward, you have been warned. So some interesting stuff I'm curious about. Obviously, this is, once again, Bruce. He's been 2 years into this Batman thing. And I think, first and foremost, what I think is kind of an interesting topic of discussion is the fact is, and this is something that I think it was at the most recent, DC Fandom where, like, it was Matt Reeves, Zoe Kravitz, and Robert Pattinson. And Robert Pattinson had talked a little bit about, like, the Bruce Wayne dynamic of it all. And I think that's so interesting. And maybe this kind of plays a little bit into the story, as I feel like Bruce Wayne isn't much of a character in this movie because Bruce doesn't lean into the Bruce thing. Like, this is still early days. He hasn't crafted the persona that is he hasn't crafted the persona that is Bruce Wayne, because even when he's Bruce Wayne, he's still Batman, because there's always been that thing that's allocated to Batman, and I think people will generally say gets allocated to DC heroes in general, is that their superhero form is their true face. So, like, Batman is Bruce's true face, Superman is Clark's true face, the disguise is their regular, like, the Bruce Wayne, the Barry Allens, the Diana Prince's, the Clark Kent's of it all. That's the mask, essentially. And they even make a point of that, because even Riddler being like, this is your true face, this is the real you. So, and I love that they utilized that in a way. And I think what also bothered Bruce so much at the end is that knowing that you started this mission for the sole purpose of trying to strike fear into everyone around you, into the bad guys. And the fact is that someone like Riddler took that and was like, no, you inspired me. And I love that, because that's always the conversation when it comes to Batman. Who came first? Batman? Does Batman bring out the bad guys, or do the bad guys bring out Batman? Chicken or the egg, which came first type of situation. And I always love that aspect, because it's also like, Batman kind of attracts the crazies, and it's like, in this particular case, Bruce actually inspired him. His need to inspire fear in this city, his way to try his vengeance, ended up creating a new monster in this town, and a town that constantly festers more and more monsters. It's a literal breeding ground for monsters, and Bruce basically helped it. The city kind of helped forge him into what he is, so for him to inadvertently play a role, be a cog in the machine of forging another monster, is just kind of an interesting dynamic. Your attempts to save this city became its undoing, in more ways than one. But kind of circling back in that, and it still kind of fits in that vein as what I was discussing before. It's like, I like that the Bruce Wayne persona isn't established. He's not, because Bruce Wayne is like, this mask of, I played the big time playboy. Like, no one expect, like, crazy billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne to be Batman. Because in this, Bruce is a recluse. He doesn't go out anywhere. Because Alfred's like, you need to go be Bruce Wayne. He's like, no, I'm not. No, who cares? It's like, the Count's one of it. I don't care. Like, he's so focused on being Batman. I'm also curious, like, into some of the history of this continuity. They didn't really go into it, because obviously we know he's 2 years in, but Alfred made a reference to, like, right after everything that happened to Bruce, he's like, I could have taught you to fight, but he's like, I could never be your father. So I'm wondering, is that where he learned how to fight? Was it from Alfred, or did the Raz or Raish, depending on how you want to, Raish I'll go, Raz I'll go, however you want to go about the pronunciation. I wonder, has that happened in this continuity? It's typically tied to his stories, but, obviously they didn't hint to it at all. I mean, maybe there were some hints and I just completely was oblivious to them, but typically that's always tied to his story about how he became the master fighter that he did, like how he gained a lot of the skills he's gained. So I'm curious, in this continuity, is it just Alfred that taught him? Because his fighting style, like, he can pretty much beat up regular thugs, because it's not like he's going up against skilled people. These are just regular Joe Schmoes. So, and like, you know, like thugs he's going up against. So, he gets, like, he's not got the most graceful fighting style. It's pretty, like, street level rough and tumble. So that's why I'm wondering, did, like, Alfred teach him, like, some, like, basic stuff? Because it doesn't seem like this skillful art style, like, artful way of fighting, like, you know, because, I mean, but also my brain is kind of a little, like, probably, like, completely overtaken by like the Arkham games, because that's such a stylized fighting style that Batman typically has. But I associate that with like a lot of stuff. But maybe it's just because I have the Arkham games so much in my head of like, oh, but like Robert Pattinson's Batman didn't fight like that. He still got all up in your grill, beat the ever living crap out of you. Like I said, I think he can hold his own, but I don't think he's the skillful person. So maybe in this continuity, he never crossed paths with the League of I had to pause. A League of Shadows, because once again, they're also known as the League of Assassins as well, depending on continuity. Like in Arrow, they're known as the League of Assassins, but it's League of Shadows. Ra's al Ghul go the whole thing. So, not unless that's going to be later in this continuity or something, but maybe it has happened. They just don't want to touch on that, because that played a role in Nolan's story, like in the overarching story of Nolan's. Like it started there, and it kind of ends with the whole Ra's al Ghul thing. So maybe that's why they didn't really want to touch on it in this. I do appreciate kind of like the armored up suit that he's wearing, because I think Christian Bale's Batman was kind of like armored up, but I can't remember. Obviously, it's like that was like super high tech armor up. This is kind of somewhat high tech, but also still low grade. It's patchwork, which I think is so interesting. Very befitting of someone who's still like figuring it out, which I think that's going to be an interesting thing going forward for this Bruce Wayne, is figuring everything out. Figuring out the Batman side of things and the Bruce Wayne. Once again, he hasn't created the persona of like who Bruce Wayne is going to be publicly, because he stays to the shadows a lot, even to the point that the Bella Riel, the running mayor who eventually becomes mayor, she talked about the fact is like, right, you have a whole bunch of money, but you haven't really done much to kind of contribute to the city. Like your family did a lot for the city, but you've kind of disappeared, and you've got a lot of money. It's like we could talk about. So I think maybe going forward in this continuity, Bruce will make more of a point to separate the two. Like, you know, keep his true face hidden. You know, because I think it's so interesting, and it makes sense why you're not always Batman 24/7, but even when he's not outwardly Batman 24/7, he still is when he's like traveling on the bike, I guess like keeping the bat suit in and you know, it's so fascinating that like he tells people like that he's always, like I said, always just in Batman mode. That's why I feel like we never really got to see Bruce Wayne. All we saw was Batman, and I think that was intentional. You know, and maybe, you know, not being able to distinguish between the two, you know, the question is like, is there a distinguishment for Bruce? Does he believe there to be one, and is he being, you know, naive to believe that there's a difference? Or does it, for him, like, it kind of almost feels like, based on the movie, he doesn't care. It's like, whatever, who cares, as long as I get the job done. Bruce Wayne, Batman, doesn't matter, it's all the same. Different people, doesn't matter. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of a fascinating element to this. That they never really fully established, like, Bruce Wayne's personality, because he's just, like I said, Batman all the time. At least that's how I saw it. Speaking of Batman, and I think it's such an interesting thing, too, about... let's dive into the family history. I thought it was fascinating. Making his mom in Arkham was really interesting. I was like, the moment they said that, I was like... They said Arkham at first, I was like, wait, did I mishear that? And it's like, no, she's in Arkham. I was like, oh, interesting. I've always known her to be... Well, because, and this is coming from someone who is not well versed in all things Batman. Now, my understanding is Bruce's family hasn't really been touched on too much. Like Thomas and Martha never were given too much background. And this is coming from someone who's ignorant to the comic books. Do correct me in the comments down below, because I have heard things about their families in the comics. Like, for example, like someone had told me, like before Batwoman even aired, was that basically the Waynes and the Kanes had bad history. That there was kind of like there was like bad blood there. The only things I've ever really known to touch on that, obviously, like the Kane side of the family is like Batwoman, and obviously we're getting a little bit of it in Pennyworth. So I think that's such an interesting thing. But just not making her a Kane, making her an Arkham, which is like fascinating, and because that opens up like Bruce having two different legacies tied to him. The Waynes have been one of the biggest established families in Gotham's history forever, and the added like, maybe the Canes typically fill that role to some extent. I feel like they never get the recognition like the Waynes do. But maybe the Canes do. Like I said, it's still like, that's a side of Bruce's family I've only in more recent years become more aware of because of stuff like Batwoman and Pennyworth. But making her an Arkham, which obviously like has its rooted history depending on what continuity you pull from. I think it's fascinating making his mom of Arkham because also like, spoilers for the Telltale Batman games, they make someone else an Arkham in that game, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. Sadly, knowing like, oh, her mom killed her dad and then killed herself, and even the fact is that apparently Martha was in and out of an asylum at a younger age, so I just think that presents, and you know, maybe this is always a part of Bruce's story, whether it be the Canes and the Waynes, or in this particular case, the Arkhams and the Waynes, that this is two legacies that he has to pull from. Like, he is both sides of his family, and maybe that could be a future storyline thread that they pull on of how he belongs to both sides, and maybe he kind of has to, you know, someone who's already struggling with figuring out his identity, struggling even more when, you know, obviously he learned all he learned about his dad. Probably like there's some darkness to the Arkham family, obviously, but now it's like all that darkness kind of runs it. I'm sure they never really went into the Wayne's history, more so Thomas, but who knows, like, you know, the Waynes can get a little dark depending on like the continuity of how far back they want to go with some of that stuff. Once again, it just depends on like what they plan on like bubbling to the surface, because it's like, right, like, is there a Court of Owls situation? Is someone from the Waynes or the Arkham side of the family part of the Court of Owls? That type of thing. And of course, all this would tie back into Carmine Falcone. I think I knew he was going to be in this movie. I didn't know how big of a role he is, but it's also, he's a central piece to this, which makes sense. That's typically where you start off, because he is the low grader, like, you know, bad guy that he is. Like, typically you will start off with a Don Carmine Falcone. I just wasn't expecting it. The moment it was like John Turturro, I was like, I didn't know you were playing Falcone. Holy crap. Like, when he first popped up, I was like, wait, is that? And it totally is. I was like, wow, I did not know that. Like, I somehow, maybe I was aware of that. I don't remember that casting element, but regardless. Not only, and I love how just so much stuff ties together. Like, the fact is that in this continuity, making it so that Selina and Bruce are tied together by Falcone. The fact is that he's the one that ended up helping Bruce silence the reporter who was working to expose Martha's secrets. And especially how he paints the picture as like, oh, Thomas was all about protecting his reputation, the election and stuff, but Alfred had to set him straight to be like, no, it was for your mom's sake. He didn't want her getting dragged through the mud, and you with some unpleasant stuff from the family. So in that moment of being so concerned about you guys, he lost himself. He made a mistake that he would end up regretting, is that he turned to Carmine Falcone, and Falcone took that as an opportunity. Like, oh, I got enough, because Thomas Wayne had always stood as kind of this pillar, and now he had dirtied himself by working with him, and now it's like, cool, now I will always have some hold on you. Because he wasn't expecting that reporter to get killed, and Elliot, which I'm like, and they even said the thing like over the video, it was like, hush, and I'm like, okay, so that will make the whole Batman, well, Bruce and Tommy Elliot thing really interesting. Like, because Hush would fit so well in this tone that, like, I don't know if they'd necessarily do him in the next movie. They easily could, but I think especially if they flow this into like a Long Halloween type of esque element to it, like, I think they could definitely like fold him into like, or utilizing him that in that regard. I mean, he might not. It depends, because they didn't really touch on Mr. Elliot's family, so we don't know whether, like, Tommy exists in this continuity. Just like, well, we know there's a Batgirl movie, but it's not in this continuity. At least, I don't believe it to be, because Michael Keaton's supposed to be the Batman in that continuity. That's a whole thing, but, because we don't know if Jim has kids either. It's just interesting, like, what seeds they ended up planting, and we have no idea how that will, like, flow going out. But like I said, I like it so interesting that Falcone connects both Selina and Bruce in that regard of like, Well, for one, I thought that was kind of an interesting development and just change to the continuity. I mean, not unless that's something that's happened before, but making Selina his daughter was interesting. Because I thought it was something a little more like, oh, she owed him because, like, he took her in or something like, not necessarily like they're familial, but just like, oh, like, I took you in under my wing, because you could tell how uncomfortable she was around him. But it's like, right, I was underneath his nose the entire time. He never knew who I was. And the resentment that she holds towards him, and even being like, oh, all this money is what he owes me, because when my mom died, I got thrown to the side and he didn't even look my direction. He didn't look my way. He never acknowledged me. I was kind of alone in this world, which plays into her, growing up alone in the dark city that is Gotham. It's not the type of city you want to grow up in alone with, without having anyone. So of course, she kind of, that plays into her personality of kind of only relying on herself, because you can't rely on anyone else. If there's anything in this life you want, you got to take it for yourself. They never really went into it either, but I'm curious, are her skills all self-taught? Because it probably is just growing, I don't know if they ever said she grew up in the orphanage. I think she went to the foster care system or something like that, right? It could just be that, just tricks she learned to pick up, in the process of just taking care of herself. But I really like Zoe Kravitz's portrayal, and I also like that she isn't she's skilled to some extent, but it's not like she's this world-class thief. She's kind of finding her way through this as well. We don't know what her experience when it comes to robbing is, but she's skilled enough to break into the deceased mayor's place to get Annika's passport. Because I think that adds an interesting layer to their dynamic too. Her, never knowing who, the cat and mouse of their relationship, obviously, or the cat and bat. But I love that he knows who she is this early on in their dynamic. It's not a thing of oh, I have no idea who you are. It's no, I know who you are since the beginning. I came back to your place, saw your name on your bills, and I was Selina Kyle, and it's crap, now you know my name. So I think that makes their dynamic that really interesting too, just because it's cool. There's no cat mouse of trying to figure out who each other is. She still has to figure it out on his end, but because I think it's so fascinating, Bruce and Selina never actually meet. He's just as Bruce Wayne. Anytime he ever interacts with her, whether it's Selina Kyle, whether it's Catwoman, it's as Batman. She never got to meet him outside of his mask. Well, when he's quote unquote wearing his mask of Bruce Wayne, she never got to see that side of him. So I think that that's such an interesting element to it. I think it's also interesting too how you start her off as because obviously she's always started off as kind of okay, I'm an adversary, I'm a thief. And then, we meet through the process, and along the way, I kind of become an anti-hero. It's she was kind of neutral ground from the very beginning. She wasn't really a thief. She really only got involved because she was trying to protect her friend. So, she started off with, the best of intentions, what I think is kind of interesting. And that whole point of her not really being a bad guy, it's so interesting. It plays into Bruce immediately assuming the worst in her. And she's it's okay, I get it. You can't help but just assume the worst in people in the city. She's I guess that kind of makes you and I not too different. And I think that element kind of plays into it, into a larger theme in this episode is of just viewing Gotham, viewing this city in that light. It's kind of what led to everything, just seeing the evil instead of seeing the light, rather than seeing the hope. It was just all about vengeance. Vengeance was the core, at the crux of all of this, exposing the lies that that Gotham presented itself as. Because at the end of the day, this was someone who was, at least with Selina, just someone that's trying to help a friend, someone who was in a very tough spot, and sadly wasn't able to save her, That's her biggest motivation, was trying to find Annika and get her out of all of this. Try to get her passport so she can get away from all this, and couldn't. And I think that's what hurt her the most, is finding out not only, the person who ended up killing Annika ended up being your own father, the father that never acknowledged you and never bothered knowing that you existed. That father, never gave you a life, and in a sense, he took this one away from you by killing someone that you cared about too. So it's just like, man, all this man ever did was take, because she lost her mom when she was like 7, and it's like she never found out who actually killed her mom, whether it was just some stalker or whoever. Because did she ever say like her mom was strangled? Because if her mom was strangled, it's like, I mean, that could be Falcone's, like, Falcone. How did I say it in the movie? I'm actually forgetting now. Because some stuff say Falcone, some stuff say Falcone. Either way, the fact is that strangling seemed to be his thing. He strangled Annika, tried to strangle Selina. So I don't remember if they talked about how Selina's mom died. Because they might have said she got strangled. I don't remember. And I think that ambiguity there, it also plays really nicely into the story of like, yeah, because it's like, Maroni must have killed my parents. It's like, or maybe Falcone did. No one will ever fully know. Everyone had the motivation to kill them, but who knows who was actually properly responsible. I think it is also that juxtaposition of Batman, even to Riddler and Catwoman, them both being kind of like opposites to him, because he is someone that it's like, I even love that line from Riddler, like, how can you talk about how can Bruce Wayne be an orphan? When his parents died, that's all it was about the orphan. How can you be an orphan with billions and a tower? No. An orphan is sleeping with, like, being in a, orphanage with like 30 some other kids. The young ones dying because it's so cold, and the rats biting at your fingers. So I'm assuming that's why he specifically used rats for when it came to the commissioner. When he killed the commissioner, was because of that very reason. But it's like, yeah, we were different. Tragedies gave birth to us. It turned us both into very different monsters. Turned us into very different creatures, into different beings. Who wanted the same thing, vengeance. We just kind of went about it to go different ways, but at the same time, it's kind of like Riddler being like, no, but there's a yin and a yang. Like I've never been the muscle, but you pieced it all together. Like I was basically the foundation. You figured it all out. We make a great team. And Bruce was like, no, like that's not us. Don't get it twisted. We are not the same. We are not. But he's like, of course. Because I said, bring him into the light. And Bruce thought that was just like, it's a metaphor just for like, put him in front of the world so the world can see him. It's like, no, put him in front of the light so I can have an opportunity to put him in, so I can kill him in front of everybody. Because I think that's such an interesting, it plays into the psychopathy that is, Riddler. He is someone that is broken on the inside that wants attention, because he says it himself. I am someone that was never seen. Now I will be. You and I will be infamous. He's one of those people who do terrible things for the notoriety of it all. He's like, our names will forever be written in the books. And I think that's so interesting how they play into some very like realistic elements of it. Just like he was able to surround himself with a online community of people who sided with him, some people that were not in the right mind, some very people on the very fringe sides of the internet, the type of sides of the internet you want to go on. And he amassed his following, people who had a like-mindedness, to the point they show up in the end and start trying to kill people. That was kind of surprising to know, and it's not like, he had a gang of his own. It's like, he has a following of, whether it's people who truly believed in what he did, or whether they were just people looking for an excuse. They needed someone to be the match, as Bruce says, to light the powder keg that is Gotham. These might have just been people who I believe in what you believe in, when in actuality they don't. They're just people looking for an excuse to do terrible things. Which isn't the takeaway from Riddler being like, once again, no shape or form is he justified in what he does. He's a terrible person, but in his mind he's justified. But it's also like, it's not like you had altruistic reasons. Like, yeah, there was some of that, but it's also like, no, I'll be famous. They'll never forget me now. They'll know me. They'll know my name, essentially. He was searching for that 15 minutes, and that 15 minutes burned up super quick by the end. So I kind of touched on it, but like I said, I'm actually so surprised how much he was Batman this movie. I don't know why. It's just like, it actually surprised me. I'm like, how much were you like, once again, how much, you were only out publicly as Bruce Wayne one time in the entire movie, and that was just because it's like, and even Alfred was like, oh my god, Bruce Wayne is making an appearance. He's like, no, I'm only going to this funeral because I know that the Riddler might show up here and make a public appearance and want to, might want to bask in the glory of his work. That's the only reason why Bruce made a public appearance. This kind of circled back a little bit to like the earlier point about like the Waynes and stuff, or his dad and his mom. I think that's so fascinating that more and more storylines have kind of started leaning into, man, were the Waynes the biggest pieces of shit or something like that. Because the aforementioned Telltale series leans into the Waynes getting mixed up in some bad stuff. Funny enough, that ties into Falcone as well. Once again, Falcone. This situation was a little different, but it still doesn't change the fact is that Thomas was responsible for getting someone killed. Granted, it was probably one of those biggest mistakes that he never had an opportunity to make up for. And then the project he was building, the renewal project, ended up being used for the criminal enterprise that exists today, where everyone was getting a slice of the pie as how they laundered money and did all this terrible stuff. So it's like, for Bruce, and I love that moment between him and Alfred in the hospital, which it is interesting because Bruce was like, yeah, Alfred only has me. So it's like, okay, so does that mean there's no Julia in this continuity? Or is it just that maybe Bruce isn't aware that there's a Julia? Because he's like, yeah, I'm the only family he has left. That's all they have is each other, It kind of ties back into that line of Alfred being like, yeah, you needed a father and I couldn't be that. But for Bruce, it's like, you were there for me. And if something happened to you, he's like, I've already been through something I never want to go through again. He's like, that fear exists in me because he was like, I was scared. I thought I found my way. I fought past my fears. It's like, no, that fear is still with me. The fear of ever being in that situation again where I lose someone close to me. Because that anger is there because it happened when it came to Alfred, and when Selina was in trouble, he injected himself what I'm assuming is adrenaline. It almost kind of reminded me of Bane's Venom, but he started like snapping out and he just like started beating the ever-living shit out of that dude at the end. It's just because it's like, right, he wasn't about to take the chance that Selina was about to potentially die in front of him again. It's like the powerlessness of not being able to protect the people you care about. Every time that happened, it just took him back to being that little boy who witnessed his parents' death, not being able to do anything then, not being able to do for anything for the past couple years, because it's like, right, the truth has always been out there. I was just too blind to see it. Alfred knew the truth and never told me the secrets of my family, but once again, it is a thing of the Waynes weren't actively working with Falcone or the criminal element of the city. It's just Thomas made one single mistake. His attempt to try and protect someone he cares about made him make a mistake that he can never take back, and just how that domino would ripple out. How, that one choice would lead to all this. Once again, who actually killed him? Who knows? Was it Maroni killing the Wayne, Thomas, and Martha so they wouldn't get close to Falcone, or did Falcone do that because Thomas decided that he wasn't going to work with him? He would expose his lies, Because that plays into, all of that plays into Riddler himself of like, right, I was forgotten. Like, the renewal project was supposed to be for me, but kids like me were like, no, we were cast aside because it's like all that mattered wasn't about what the Waynes wanted to do with the renewal project. All that mattered was the Waynes died. This prominent family, once again, poor billionaire orphan Bruce Wayne. So, and I think that's so fascinating too that I don't know how to interpret that. Like, because Bruce was like, the moment he was looking at Riddler's board, he was like, right, the time as Batman will be over. And Jim's like, what? And he goes, confronts him, and he keeps saying it over and over, Bruce Wayne. But he doesn't reveal his identity because it's like, it doesn't matter because Bruce Wayne isn't who you are. Batman is. He's like, I wish you could have seen me in my mask. When I was kind of like without my mask, when I was kind of free, but you never really got an opportunity, because anytime they interacted, it was like never face to face being who they both really are. And so It plays into that very Joker-esque element of there are times when the Joker will know that Bruce is Batman and will never tell anyone because it's like it ruins the fun. I want you to be who you are because I think that's kind of what he wants because he's like, no, we both get to be who we are. We're two sides of the same coin, Bruce. You and I, we are yin and yang. We feed each other. You helped give birth to me. I allowed you to show your true face and be your truest form, just like you did the same for me. Sadly, it all didn't work out the way because he was hoping that, I guess when it was all said and done, he was thinking, like, he was like, no, this wasn't how it was supposed to work. You're supposed to work with me. You're up here calling me a psychopath. It's like, no, this isn't how it was supposed to happen. We're supposed to have kind of our repertoire, like our thing, but you're kind of ruining that right now by kind of spitting on all that we are, all that we have between us. I wonder if it's going to be one of those interesting... I'm curious if it's going to be one of those things where it's like technically Paul Dano and Robert Pattinson and never are on set together or something like that. I wonder if it's going to be revealed to be one of those things because like the way that was shot, I don't know if you'd ever know for sure if like they were ever like on set together at the same time. Maybe, possibly. Once again, like the closest they had to a face-to-face throughout the movie was at the funeral or whatever, and then like when he was up in the higher like arches of it and Bruce was down below when the car like rushed through. Like that's the only time they were like generally in the same room prior to like the very end. Well, when he came to visit him in the cell and stuff. But yeah, him knowing Bruce's identity. But that's why I also wasn't sure because I was like, does that mean like he so far doesn't... Because that part of me was like, oh, is he one under that impression like, oh, there's no way Bruce Wayne could be Batman? But it leans to like no, it doesn't matter who you were because that's not who you are. Batman is who you are. Bruce Wayne is just a mask. This is you being able to be the real you, like, and that's what this has all been about. Kind of even making Gotham reveal its true self is like, Gotham, reveal who and what you really are. The individuals in Gotham reveal who and what you are, so. Obviously, there's the whole Penguin situation, which still, even knowing that's Colin Farrell, I'm like, I can't see it. That's some good damn prosthetics. I mean, because everyone said that when they literally found out, wait, that's Colin Farrell? I still feel that way. I'm like, it's so weird to be like, that's Colin Farrell? It doesn't feel like it. I can't even see any of it. Like, the makeup or prosthetics must be so heavy because I can't even see his face in that. But maybe it's easier for other people. I can't see it at all. I'm like, that you could tell me that's some other actor. Because I would believe you because I just can't see Colin Farrell in that. But still. I wonder what it... I mean... I was about to say, I was like, typically he's not... I wonder, is Oz ever... I wonder, is Telltale the only one that ever do the British Penguin? He's been British before, right? Obviously, he wasn't British in Gotham. Is Telltale the only thing that's ever really leaned in him being British? I don't know. I like that we do have almost a Gotham-esque element where it's like, right, he's second fiddle to someone else. He was second fiddle to Falcone, but now it's like, oh, Falcone's out of the picture. He was about to try and pop him himself, but yeah, it didn't happen. But I did love that it's like now that the opportunity has presented himself. He's also in the movie way more than people kind of made it out to be. Because initially people are like, oh, he's only in the movie for like 5 minutes. I mean, I guess if you put all his on-screen time on the clock, it's probably not a lot. But he was way more involved in this movie than I thought he'd be. Once again, I was actually surprised to get this much Falcone like we did. But obviously he was like a pivotal, crucial part to like, you know... He's always at the heart of, like, Gotham's criminal world, so it makes sense. Obviously, I love the whole car chase sequence. I thought that was fantastic. Getting the... Like, just from the trailers alone, I was like, oh, that's sick. Given the full context of it all, too, is still pretty dope. Because I love how the reveal of the Batmobile, because it was, like, the first reveal of it, and it's just, like, everyone's just looking, and they just see the car, like, Selina's looking, Jim is looking... Oz is looking, and then just all of a sudden, it's just like, room comes this, like, muscle car. Because I really appreciate, like, from the very beginning, I've always talked about, I like that design. Like, I know for some people, it's like, because they've done the Tumbler for so long, that a lot of people really enjoy the, like, oh, like, the fact is, it is something different. It is a muscle car, which is interesting. Speaking of Jim, I think that's such an interesting. I really like him and Bruce's, like him and Batman's dynamic, because at the end of the day, like we never really get to be, because I know there's supposed to be a spin-off TV show on HBO Max called like Gotham PD, which I think it's funny because even Ben, oh god, I'm going to butcher his last name. It's McKenzie, right? The actor who plays Jim on Gotham. Even he has to. Even he was like, all right, they're kind of doing Gotham again, even though Gotham's, but it's like you want to do Gotham for a different continuity. I get it, but still, it is going to be interesting, like to really kind of dive into like how this partnership worked, and because Jim bringing him to the crime scene, this movie, like the first crime scene with the mayor's death. It seems like that was the first time, because everyone was like, whoa, 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 what are you doing here? I guess Jim's never brought him to a crime scene before. I guess they've had their back alley, like, meetings and stuff. The bat signal is super new. I wonder, has anyone else ever attributed the bat signal's meaning to be what it is in this? I'll get to it in a second, but I love Jim and Batman's like interactions and that partnership that they have. I even love that like Jim and Bruce kind of look eye to eye at each other at the funeral, but like there's nothing there. It's like, all right, we are partners, but you don't recognize me without my getup. But it's that funny thing of like Bruce Wayne has no part to play in this, even though he's at the center of everything. It's his father's sins that led to all of this. The sins of the father, are passed on to the son. And I guess, like, even in this case, are passed on to the daughter because Falcone and Selina. But my point is, I really like the fact is that Jim is the only one who likes Batman, to the point, like, everyone else that sees the crime scene. What are you doing here, weirdo? I even love at one point, like, whoa, what about contaminating the chain of evidence? And it's like, he's wearing gloves, which I love. Because that has to be because I know for some people they don't like, because I know some people don't like when they see like, oh, you're fiddling around a crime scene. It's like, you're not wearing any gloves. Like, this evidence has been completely tampered with, especially when you think about the fact this, it's like, well, he is walking around in a makeshift bat suit, and he's coming in from the rain, so he's probably polluting a lot of evidence, but he's also pretty keen on and paying attention to stuff like that. But I mean, that was just kind of a nice little side note, just to like, yeah, it is him kind of jumping in the middle of like police investigation, like touching everything, which is kind of a big no-no. He is contaminating a lot of evidence. I was about to say, at the end of the day, Falcone's dead, so it's like nothing necessarily needs to go on that front. But it's like, well, all the Riddler stuff, it's like he was wearing his gloves then, so he never went without his gloves. But still, I guess like that evidence doesn't necessarily have to be considered like tainted or whatever. But I love that whole thing of like, when like after the explosion, when the DA blew up because he'd rather die than rat out the rat at the beginning of all this. Because even I was thinking like the moment they were talking about the rat and stuff like that, I'm like, Batman? Like that was immediately what came to my mind with like a rat with wings or something like that. I thought like, and then eventually they were like, oh, a penguin, and then like, oh, a Falcone, like being the rat. But it's like, no, well, he ratted on Maroni, but that's because it's like, no, like I'm the one running things, like all the bad cops and stuff, he doesn't work for them, they work for him, because he pretty much got a slice of that pie from everybody. But I love that to see when he's knocked out, everyone's like, yeah, screw it, like take the mask off, and it leads to him kind of going toe to toe with a lot of the cops, and then him and Jim are talking, and Jim's like, go ahead and punch me, here's the key, get out of here. I was like, yo, good guy, Jim Gordon, that's my guy. I even do like that Penguin being like, what is this, the good cop, bad cop? And like the back and forth, and just like, all right, Bruce comes in with a couple lines, then we bounce back to Jim, then we bounce back to Batman, and then we bounce back to Jim. I just like that buddy cop element that they kind of had going for them in that moment was pretty dope. Because at the end of the day, like, Jim is the only one that he can trust. I do love that cop. I wonder, that cop who initially doesn't like Batman, but then at the end he was there with him, like, oh, when Bruce ended up discovering what Riddler was really doing, the whole bombs around the city. I think that's so fascinating because first and foremost, that cop, I wonder, is he playing a little bit of a Montoya role? Or maybe he's kind of a little bit of a Bullock. maybe a combination of the two is kind of what he's kind of supposed to be serving kind of as a role as. Because I don't think, because Bullock doesn't always kind of get along with Batman. Like, because Gordon out of anyone, I guess maybe it just depends on the continuity, because some stuff, Montoya and Batman, who knows what, I'm not always sure what their dynamic is, but I feel like Bullock and Batman don't always get along, but they usually only tolerate each other because Jim's kind of the buffer zone. That's my experience typically. I also like what they basically set up at the end when Riddler like basically blew up and they basically tried to drown Gotham. I'm like, are they doing a little bit of a no man's land type of element to this, which is interesting. It's a thing from the comics that the final season of Gotham was kind of based around, when basically, spoilers for the final season of Gotham, at the end of season 4, Joker blew up a whole bunch of bridges that led out of Gotham, so Gotham was pretty much isolated from the rest of the world. So I'm wondering they're kind of doing a similar thing in that, because they are talking about, like, right, crime is ramping up and people are going to start, like, making their territories, trying to grab for any bit of power they can. So it definitely kind of has, like, that no man's element to it. I think that's kind of what they're, like, winking and nodding to. So I think that's going to be interesting as people kind of run rampant doing whatever they want. Like, we have no idea what the long-term ramifications of this are, but you know that wasn't like a thing of like, oh yeah, it's like probably a lot of people sadly died. That doesn't seem like that's a first movie thing. That seems like how Bane attacked Gotham in Dark Knight Rises, from my recollection. That's like a third in a trilogy. I feel like starting off with mass destruction in Gotham, that's wild. Now this is Metropolis, which you kind of started off with like that, but it's different. It's Superman going toe to toe with a Kryptonian. Stuff is going to get messed up, but like I don't know. Like the devastation was kind of crazy to me. Like the entire city getting flooded, cars flying everywhere. I obviously haven't really talked about it, but I did talk about it. I do like a lot of the like action sequences of just like Bruce going toe to toe and just bulldozing straight ahead, like at the top of those like things at the top of like that center, like taking down all those other people dressed as Riddler. The last guy that he beat up, I was like, oh my god, that's going to be the kid he scared the crap out of at the beginning of the movie. I was wondering if it was that. I have to look into it. Am I crazy? Is that the actor who plays Tim Drake on Titans? I swear that's him. Or if not, it's just someone that looks a lot like him. I couldn't help but notice that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I find that so fascinating, just like but yeah, like Tim Drake got introduced. Was he introduced this season or was he in the previous season? He wasn't. I think this was his first season, right? Because this past season of Titans took place in Gotham, interestingly enough. But I want to say that's the same actor, but it might not be. The kid that was with that clown-faced gang, which it seems like there's a Joker in this continuity, so I'm like, is that supposed to be his people, or are they just like people who just like wearing the makeup? Because whoever it was, it seemed like their face was jacked up, but it didn't seem like, from what we saw, the lighting and everything, you couldn't really tell. It didn't seem like it was makeup. It seemed like their face was jacked up. They had scars, but still. But I really enjoyed that whole, like, I mean, just the movie in general, but also, like, that final sequence of just, like, right, struggling to do what you can to mediate some of this, help as many people as possible, to the point that, like, when he was leading people out, he reached for, like, the mayor's hand, but she didn't take it, but the former Mitchell, his son, ended up reaching out to Batman, being the first one, and Batman led them away, to safety and stuff, led all of them away. And I love that became the messaging of this movie. It wasn't about, vengeance. Like, I did have an effect on the city. I was wondering whether or not I would. And at the end of the day, I didn't care. I would try and go about things my way. But it's like my way, my vengeance led to all of this. But, it made him realize, like, this city needs something. It needs hope. Because where is the bat symbol supposed to strike fear? Because I can't be everywhere. But the moment they see that in the sky, they know it's a symbol of fear. Like, people scared that in that darkness, I might walk out. Maybe you're just like those clown guys at the beginning. You just happen to be the unfortunate fools who have the actual Batman walk out of that darkness. But now that symbol is supposed to represent hope. It's like, right, we all, because Bruce is like, right, everyone in this city, like, there's not anything we can do to change our past, but going forward, we all have scars. Everyone has scars like I do, but I can't change the past for myself, for them, but I can be that beacon of hope. I can be that symbol of hope in this dark city. I can light the way, like he literally did, pulling them from the darkness, like, which obviously bothered Riddler, because it's like, no, this is supposed to be about me, and it became less about the devastation he brought and more so the hope and light that Batman brought. Because I think that plays into the fact is that he stopped Selina from killing her dad. Granted, luckily it all worked out in the end. He still got God anyway. But if she had killed him, like, it's like you would have carried that with her. That would have made you no better than him. So him being able to get her to back down, knowing how much she wanted to, how much she deserved to die, but it's still like, no, like, you do this, you'll kind of never forgive yourself. You'll lose yourself to it. So being able to keep her from going down that route. Kind of an interesting thing. Now I'm about to go on a little bit of a tangent. I think it's kind of interesting. The twins. I immediately recognized one of them. I was like, hey, isn't that one of the twins from Teen Wolf? And like both twins are in this. I'm blanking on. I know one's name was Aiden. I can't remember the other twins' name. Their characters' names. But yeah, they were in the TV show Teen Wolf, which I find interesting on so many levels because other actors from that show of Teen Wolf have popped up in DC-related stuff, like Tyler Hoechlin, who is Superman on Superman and Lois, which the actor who played Peter, Ian Bohen, is also in this season of Superman and Lois. So it's fascinating how that all kind of works out like that. But it's just like, hey, you're all kind of in the DC universe, like just like Teen Wolf alumni or something like that. I just think it's kind of fascinating. Selina does leave the city, but I doubt this is the end of their story. It's just the beginning. Which I do like that we did start here, rather than it being like, well, because the Nolan trilogy ends with a Batman and Catwoman. I like that we start there, because we don't know what the next chapter could be. Maybe there won't be any Selina, or maybe she'll come back. Maybe it'll just be a thing of, she'll come back potentially in the third movie, because there's supposed to be a trilogy, but I don't think anyone knows for sure, because I think Matt Reeves has put out there what he'd want to do with a sequel. I think one of the names he included was I saw thrown around the internet. I don't know if it's a direct quote, but I've heard him. Apparently, he's wanted to do a Mr. Freeze thing, which is one of those villains I always wanted to see get the the Joker treatment, and I feel like to an extent Riddler did, and Riddler was one of those people I wanted to, and Mr. Freeze was the other one. So I could it'd be interesting with Mr. Freeze, because of just the nature of Riddler isn't like a science fictional villain. It'd be interesting to see how you go about Mr. Freeze. I'm not saying you can't do it seriously or something like that. It's just going to be interesting, knowing how you approach that, kind of ground it to an extent. Because that's what I'm saying. If you Jokerfied Mr. Freeze, how would you have made that as grounded as possible? You could have, but it would have been interesting and tonally to see how you would be able to do that. I'd love to see potentially a Mr. Freeze in a sequel, but like I said, they've already set up so many other threads too. So it's right, are you going to do anything with the whole Elliot Hush situation? Obviously, there's still the whole Penguin thing that's at play here. We already saw how many people were inspired by the Riddler, how many others will rise to the occasion. Which I should also note, because I made a whole point about, it's funny how little that Bruce is Batman. He's Batman on time and not Bruce. It kind of plays into Riddler, too, because I forgot to, most of the movie, Riddler's Riddler. He's not Edward, until, the end. Those are, the only times you see him just as himself. Every other time, he's in disguise. And I do like how, scary it is that he's just standing there sometimes, because it's one of those things, like a serial killer, like a Jason or a Freddy, that's just you never see them until the last moment. Then the moment the camera turns, they're gone. It's no, it was creepier because he stayed there the entire time, and then all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, then he attacks. It's just interesting how that all played out, and I love that the weapon he ended up using at the beginning ended up being the piece needed to reveal his true plan underneath it all. It's I love how they did that, because at the time, and just when he got captured, you're like, okay, so it keeps going and going. What's next? What does he have planned? So it was all quite fascinating. And obviously Riddler isn't dead, so buddied up with potentially the Joker and Once again, we have no idea what villains have already been established. It feels like Riddler's the first OG supervillain in his continuity. So it doesn't, I mean, to what we know, because I guess he's just been taking down local thugs and stuff. Especially considering like Falcone's been running things for like the past 2 years. Bruce hasn't gone after him. So it's like, right, if someone of his level is still out and about, there can't be that many supervillains. But once again, how much of what Edward did, or rather the Riddler did, inspired others like it did already, but like how many beyond that, or was that already cut off at the pass? How many people did are given rise because, right, how many people want to meet that symbol, want to rise up to match that symbol of hope that now Gotham has? You know, it makes you wonder. And what role will potentially Selina play going forward? I love that line of, right, of course you're already taken because you belong to the city, not me. Because she's like, oh, like, we could go like knock off some like high like level hedge fund people or whatever, but it's like, no, we can't. Because obviously for her, she believes that Gotham can't change, but he does. And she's like, you're going to get killed in the process. It's like, maybe, but at the end of the day, I have to try. You know, because this city deserves a second chance, you know, because even the current mayor, she's trying to rally everyone to build things up. She's like, want to make you believe in the system again, because so many people let you down, because there were so many corrupt cops, ADAs, so many people neck deep in all of this like renewal thing. And the question then becomes, what does Bruce do with this going forward? Being another light in the darkness that is Gotham, I'm assuming, like, how do you pull yourself up knowing, like, right, your family's kind of name has been tarnished? How do you rebuild that? How do you go about that? I guess becoming more of a public figure. Once again, do you try and put on a persona of the playboy, or how does Bruce handle things going forward? Does he continue to be the recluse? Just kind of thoughts like that kind of rummaging through my head. But these are obviously just, you know, some of my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours in the comments down below. What are your thoughts about the movie? What are some of your thoughts about my thoughts? Just let me know what you're thinking, what you're feeling in the comments down below. What would you want to see in a sequel? What would you expect to see in a sequel? Like I said, just let me know all of that. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.